Well, I'm speaking with Elijah Wald. He is a folk blues guitarist and music historian, former world music critic for the Boston Globe, and author of the new book, The Dozens, The History of Rap's Mama. So, listeners, what do you think? When you hear Speckled Red or Memphis Minnie, or later we'll talk about Bo Diddley and Langston Hughes, do you also hear traces of what will become or would become Jay-Z and Kanye West? Or are these two traditions completely different? Why do you think Yo Mama jokes and verbal dueling worked their way so deeply into hip-hop culture and music? Or do you think this is just another way of justifying the misogyny and machismo that is in so much commercial, especially hip-hop today? Give us your thoughts at 1-800-423-8255. That's 800-423-TALK. So, Elijah Wald, I want to play a little bit. I want to move forward in time slightly to 1959, and honestly, one of my favorites, the great Bo Diddley.
Hey, since you told me about my girl, I'm going to tell you about yours. I was walking down the street with your girl. Yeah. I took her home for a drink, you know. Took her home? Yeah, just for a drink. But that chick looked so ugly. She had to sneak up on the glass to get a drink of water.
She was so ugly she had to sneak up on the glass to get a drink of water. So that's Bo Diddley with Jerome Green in Say Man, 1959. Not quite the Yo Mama tradition here, but what's it evolved to?
Well, it's the same tradition. I mean, it could be Yo Mama's so ugly.
So what's it evolved to here by 1959?
You're so ugly. I mean, honestly, they just decided to do girlfriends. And that still counted as the dozens. I mean, talking about somebody's girlfriend. And in hip-hop, that's remained much more common. If you watch rap battling, they very, very rarely talk about each other's mamas, but talking about people's girlfriends is still open.
I'm just curious as to why you got involved in pursuing the history of the dozens and the Yo Mama rap link, because it doesn't seem like something initially that has had some serious scholarly treatment.
Really what happened was I was doing a much larger, broader project on all the connections between the blues tradition and the rap tradition. And chapter 4 was going to be the dozens. I mean, I have 3 other chapters written. And then I just started reading up on it. And there was so much material. And so I thought, let's read the book that somebody must have written on the dozens. And no one had. So that just seemed like a quick, easy, fun thing to do.
But it turned into...
No, it was a quick, easy, fun thing to do. I mean, it's a whole book, but it's a book that took a year, not a book that took 5 years.
And so I guess what I keep coming back to is this idea that there are lots of deep-seated antecedents or tradition that work their way, through the generations into modern music.
Sure.
And forgive me if it seems like I've asked this before. I guess the answer just isn't terribly clear in my mind. What do you think it is in particular about the dozens and about, something which today we kind of laugh and scoff at, when the whole concept of Yo Mama jokes that you say is such a powerful force in music?
I'm not saying it's such a powerful force in music. I think laughing at it was what you were always supposed to do. I mean, the Speckled Red record you played, what it says on the record is comedian with piano. I mean, that was a comedy routine. So, no, I don't think that's changed. I think the only thing that's changed is that with rap, and incidentally, somebody just emailed me this morning with a rap record called Ya Mama that's a pure dozen thing from 1982 that I had missed and no one had mentioned to me. So that's how early in rap people were doing straight-up Ya Mama records. What my bigger point is that there's this huge tradition of African-American verbal rhyming, which has always kind of been overlooked if it wasn't in songs, and that has surfaced in rap. And the dozens, I'm not saying the dozens is it. Mm-hmm. There are all sorts of aspects of that tradition. But clearly when you get into like rap battling, older African Americans regularly call in when I'm doing shows like this saying, I was saying to my kids, that rap battling you do, there's nothing new about that. We used to do that. And they're talking about the dozens.
Well, let's talk a little bit about how we see the tinges or the echoes of this in the world of poetry, because this is one that you sent us.
Sure.
It's wonderful. It's Langston Hughes, his poem Horn of Plenty, from actually his epic poem Ask Your Mama, 12 Moods for jazz, 1960. It's an epic poem that he intended to be set to jazz. The cut that we have here is Hughes himself, but without the music.
Me, who used to be nobody, nothing but another shadow in the quarter of the Negroes. Now a name, my name, a name. Yet they ask me right out on my patio, where did I get my money? I said, from your mama.
Langston Hughes recorded there in his poem Horn of Plenty. What's particularly special about this to you?
Well, he actually regularly brought up the dozens also in his columns, the simple columns for the Chicago Defender. And he very much saw it as an African-American code that you could use on white people and they didn't know what you were saying. And that's what he's doing in that poem. That poem is about living in a white neighborhood on Long Island. And it also has lines like, still they ring my doorbell and ask me, can I recommend a maid? I said, yeah, your mama. The idea is that every black person hearing this knows exactly what he's saying, whereas white people go, my mother? Why my mother?
In the poem, he also talks about it's a really fascinating poem because he mentions Charlie Mingus, and he talks about Richard Wright and why Richard Wright went off to Europe and didn't come home to the United States at the end of his life. I have part of the poem here where Langston Hughes, writes, instead of coming home to decent die, again referring to Richard Wright, in Harlem or the South Side of Chicago or the womb of Mississippi. And one should love one's country, for one's country is your mama. So that's a completely different sort of take there on the whole concept of, I guess, your mama.
Yeah, well, the reason that your mama goes so deep is that it does mean so much to people. It is a metaphor for where you come from. It's a metaphor for where you start and for what you love most.
So let's get another woman's voice in here. This is Maya Angelou. And her poem, a portion, I should say, of her poem, The 13s.
Your mama's took to shouting, your papa's gone to war, your sister's in the street, and your brother's in the bar, the 13s. Right on. Your cousin's taking smack, your uncle's in the joint, your buddy's in the gutter, shooting for his point, the 13s. Right on. And you make me sorry. You out here by yourself. I'd call you something awful, but there just ain't nothing left except the 13s. Right on.
Maya Angelou and the 13s. Great poem. What's she doing there?
Well, that's half the poem. That's the 13s black.
Yeah.
And there's also the 13s white, which is addressed to white people.
Well, we've got that, so let's play that.
Your mama kissed the chauffeur. Your papa did the cook. Your daughter did the dirty in the middle of the book, the 13s. Right on. Your sister wears some jockeys. Your son, he wears a bra. Your brother jones your cousin in the back seat of the car, the 13s. Right on. Your money thinks you something, but if I learn to curse, I'd tell you what your name is, but there just ain't nothing worse than the 13s. Right on.
So tell us about what Maya Angelou is doing here.
Well, she's doing a bunch of things. The cadence is she's taking the sort of rhymes that she would have learned as a girl on the street. That's very much sort of schoolgirl clapping, jump roping kind of rhymes. And there are lots of those. Your mommy, your daddy, your greasy-headed granny, and so forth. She's also trying to make a political point about white and black. And she's also trying, very obviously, to find a poetic voice in black tradition to use in academic poetry. And she's turning to the dozens for that. She's saying, this is the kind of rhyming we've always done. And if I put it on a page, you call it poetry, but we've always done this.
Well, I guess now is the time for us to sort of really wind the clock into where we are today. In the last 2 minutes or so we have in the show. And I want to do that by reading a quote that you have from Jay-Z. And you've got it in your book, The Dozens, The History of Rap's Mama. And here's what Jay-Z says. He says, I've read articles where people compare rap to other genres of music like jazz or rock and roll. But it's really mostly like a sport, boxing to be exact. The stamina, the one-man army, the combat aspect of it, the ring, the stage. And then also a little earlier, you've got a quote from Grandmaster Flash, who says, this is much earlier, several decades earlier, but he says that, one day he was like with his crew walking around the streets and looking for basically another group to sort of musically compete with. And he said, when we found another crew, 4 deep just like us, when Melvin said one of the other dudes' mamas danced like a silverback gorilla, it was on. So talk about these things, the idea that the verbal sparring, the yo mama, it's all the way into, Grandmaster Flash, who's really one of the great people who helped give birth to modern-day hip-hop, through Jay-Z.
Well, I mean, in that moment, actually, Grandmaster Flash, they were a dance crew, and they were going into breakdancing against the other group. But the Jay-Z thing, that whole idea that you can fight with your mouth or with your fists, and it's not that different, is completely inherent in the Dozens. I just had Charles Coe, a local poet, just came up to me after he heard I'd done this book and said, yeah, when I was growing up, the Dozens was so great. Because, I was not one of those kids who could fight with my fists, but I could fight with my mouth, and it got you the same respect.
So we've just got a couple seconds, but I've got to ask you, for people listening, some people might think, this is all very interesting, but is Elijah Wald, excusing some of the worst or less savory aspects of modern-day hip-hop?
I think the bottom line is, who cares what I think about it? I'm a 50-year-old white guy. We're supposed to be upset by nasty hip-hop. We're NPR. It's our job to be upset by that.
Okay. Elijah Wald is the author of the new book, The Dozens, The History of Rap's Mama. Thank you so much. It was a great sort of run through time and a really wonderful idea. Thanks so much for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Listeners, let us know what you think at radioboston.org. We're going to go out with some of that great new stuff. And in a moment, we're going to come back with our weekly Common Health segment. Stay with us. I'm Meghna Chakrabarty. This is Radio Boston.
It's crazy how you could go from being Joe Blow to everybody on your...